Hello and welcome to Ideagen TV. Today with us we have Nick Larigakis. Welcome, Nick. So glad to have you here.
Good to be here.
It's great to have you. So today we're talking a little bit why leadership is important in the Eastern Mediterranean and, kind of how we can tie in innovation. And I know this is one of your expertise. To kind of start it off, can you tell the audience a little bit about your role in the Hellenic American Institute?
Well, the American Hellenic Institute started back in 1974, and I've been there 35 years, I'm proud to say. Maybe people in this now will think maybe I'm crazy and a masochist, but nonetheless, I think I'm doing something exceptionally important because I do believe also in enjoying what you do. And it's one of the things I talk about when I speak to younger audiences, that don't look for the money in the beginning. Have some passion and have some liking for what you do, and ultimately those other things will fall into place. But there's nothing I view as being more difficult in life than going to a job every day that you cannot stand being there for 8 or 9 hours. And at the end of the day, the hours that we're most awake, we're at work. So we better really like what we're doing. So with me, 35 years, I think speaks for itself. I really enjoy what I'm doing because I really feel I'm making a difference. The organization is making a difference. And I believe also in the mission and the importance of the Eastern Mediterranean. So the American Hellenic Institute, to answer your fundamental question here, is an organization dedicated to strengthening U.S.-Greece, U.S.-Cyprus relations, always within the context of what is in the best interest of the United States. We're not employed by Greece or Cyprus as their lobbyists. We're American citizens with an affinity to the Eastern Mediterranean in terms of our background. But we view that there's a lot of important interest there for the United States and for the region, and that's what we promote.
Excellent, excellent. Good to know. So recently you were visiting Athens and you were speaking with U.S. Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt, discussing the important role that the Greek American community plays in advancing the U.S.-Greek relations. So can you share some of your insights with this meeting with the ambassador and what
Sure.
do you expect in the future moving forward?
Well, just for the record, I go to Greece 5 or 6 times a year, Cyprus another 2 or 3 times. Even during COVID, I was able to keep up to a great degree with my travel schedule. And certainly on all my visits to Greece, I do call upon Ambassador Pyatt. And I'd like to take this opportunity to also congratulate the tremendous work of Ambassador Jeffrey Pyatt, who's been there sort of a record almost going on 6 years, which is very unusual. He started with Obama, went right through 4 years of Trump, and now continues through with this administration, although now the new ambassador has been nominated. And we view that transition probably happening sometime in the very near future, whenever Congress continues to, get to what Congress should be doing. But be it as it may, on this particular occasion, we always exchange different points of views depending on, what's going on in any given moment in time. And these issues are not always constant. They are fluid. They change, from time to time, depending on when these visits take place. But nonetheless, the ambassador, and particularly this particular ambassador, has underscored the importance of the Greek American community, which of course our organization represents, into the advancement and the strengthening of the U.S.-Greece relationship. So in that regard, we talked a little bit about that. And I'll just give you an example of where one of these discussions was very important. On one of my meetings a couple of years ago with the ambassador, he says to me, hey, Nick, I could really use your help on something. I said, sure, Mr. Ambassador, what can I do for you? Again, I'm always very careful, obviously, because, I'm not going to allow myself to be used from anyone. But if I feel it's something that can advance the cause in terms of what my core mission is, then absolutely I will hear it out. And in this case, it was an important point, one that I never thought of very carefully. And that was regarding to increasing what's called IMET, International Military Educational Training, is what the acronym stands for. And this is a program whereby the United States provides military funding to foreign governments, foreign armies that are, within NATO or friendly to the United States, and whereby they come and they participate in U.S. war institutions, academic institutions, war colleges and so forth. And this is important, I found out, because, this is where a lot of the junior officers get to meet each other, get to become educated, and down the road, today's second lieutenant is tomorrow's chief of the Navy, and therefore the relationships continue to grow between on the bilateral relationship. So in this case, he said Greece only has $200,000 a year. And he says, he made a joke. He says, I can put it on my credit card. I said, all right, let me go back and, get some work on it. So I contacted U.S. Senator here from Maryland, a good friend, Senator Van Hollen. I said, Chris, can we do something about this? He said, let me look at it. So make a long story short, we put in it was 1.5 million and ultimately became 1 million. And it's been 1 million now for a couple of years. And now in a recent legislation that just passed, it's been put into this legislation for 1.8 million over the course of the next 5 years. But of course, when it gets authorized, it still needs to ultimately be appropriated. And although in this case, I think ultimately this money will get appropriated. So these discussions are very important in a whole number of ways. And, and sometimes I tell him certain things as well in terms of where I think U.S. policy is now moving in a certain direction that we feel is important regarding the importance of the region. And, but we have an open line of communication. And he's done an exceptional job, this particular ambassador, as others, but he has really carried the ball of opening the embassy to individuals like myself to make calls upon him and to be able to have communication and exchange of dialogue.
Wow. So, you talk a lot of strategy with, ambassadors and other figures in Greece and the East Mediterranean, sorry. Why do you feel that the Eastern Mediterranean is of such strategic importance in U.S. diplomacy?
Sure. Well, all you need to do is look at the map. And if you want to look at a little bit of history, all you need to do is look at why Truman went up to Congress in 1947 and asked for, I forget how many millions of dollars it was, but it was a tremendous amount of money in terms to give to Greece and to Turkey at the time for one reason, to contain Soviet communist expansionism from coming into the Balkans. So you can start from there in terms of how important they viewed U.S. policy at that time and continues to this day views this region. When you look at the map, you look at an area of Greece where it's a sort of a junction point between the Balkans, the Middle East, Northern Africa, Western Europe. This is Greece right there in the middle. And what goes through here? This is a major area for trade, for energy, for commerce, for telecommunications, and it is on the outer edge of the European Union and of NATO. Greece and Turkey make up the south and eastern flank of NATO. And in more recent times, when you look at the area that surround Greece, from the Libyan coast all the way up to the Albanian coast, you can make an argument that this is what's been known as the arc of instability, where there's a lot of malign actors surrounding this area, which are not necessarily friendly to Western interests and U.S. interests. And Greece and the relationship that has developed over the course of the last 7-8 years with Cyprus and Israel, the so-called 3+1 relationship, the one being the United States in this case, which was elevated to one with Secretary Pompeo. These are the states, Western-oriented, same values, democratic institutions, democratic governments, and who promote peace and stability in the Eastern Mediterranean. And that's important because, as I said, this is a very strategic area for U.S. geostrategic interests. And for those interests to be able to take hold and to be able to advance, you need peace and stability. The United States can't be everywhere around the world at any given time. Even though we try to do that sometimes, to the detriment, of our own interests. But be it as it may, you need proper, faithful, reliable allies. Greece does that in this relationship with Cyprus and Israel. And so they are the lighthouse, they are the beacon in the very turbulent waters of the Eastern Mediterranean and provide for that peace and stability for U.S. geostrategic interests, in a nutshell.
Fantastic. I want to switch gears a little bit to digital diplomacy. And we're seeing right now, it's more relevant than ever in that, diplomats or higher up government figures are posting on Twitter, they're communicating, via email. We had Ambassador Theros a little bit ago talking about how it used to be, over Morse code practically. And can you talk a little bit how digital diplomacy has changed things, and do you think it's for better or worse?
Well, in my case, it was smoke signals. No, no, but really, look, I started working, at the American Hellenic Institute in 1987. Computers were almost just little smaller than the ones that took the Apollo astronauts to the moon. And the telephones were desktop, and certainly nothing we have today. We still use the old IBMs, and God knows what kind of printers with those little holes, in the paper, that the things came out of. We come a long way, baby, as somebody once said. I am not one that totally embraces, technology, to the way some people do. Make no mistakes about it. You deal with the realities, and the realities are technology is here to stay, and it will continue to advance. I think it needs to slow down a little bit because the advancements are a little too much to try to keep up with. Right now, I get messages to me from Twitter, from email, from text messages to Viper. Okay, and it's like, where's it coming from? And it becomes a little overwhelming. And once upon a time, when somebody wrote a letter, you could take your time, writing the response, developing the response, and it was understood that it might take 2 to 3 weeks to get a reply. Now, somebody sends you a text message or an email, and you don't get that in a matter of 15 minutes. It's like, what happened? Did you get it? What's going on? It's made life a much more hectic. Now, having said that, obviously, okay, it's very valuable technology. There's no way we can. I was wondering how we ever did what we did without our cell phones, which we have the world in our hand. I can be on my island on Skopelos in August for a month and be just connected completely to the world in my office just by holding that device in my hand. And that obviously has a lot of benefits as well. But as I said, you're always in contact. You're always, somebody has a right to approach you. Someone has a right to have access to you. And then by turn, the same with you. It's important in a lot of ways, especially in the work that I've done and continue to do, because especially during COVID, it's presented itself in a different way. Where before everything was done face-to-face, a lot of the work that we do. Now, it was either going to do it that way or do it on Zoom, okay? And that presented a whole other vehicle of communicating, now losing touch, and by also able to promote it to a larger audience at practically no cost or very little cost. However, having said all that, and as much as positive there is in technology, there are just certain things, and I put diplomacy and foreign policy on this stage, that you still have to do it face-to-face. There are certain things that you can do through Zoom and through email and through FaceTime, but there are other things you just absolutely, unequivocally have to do face-to-face. There's just no, in my opinion, there's no substitute for that. The meetings that I had with Ambassador Pyatt in his office, okay, do not compare in any shape, way, or form in those same communications I had with him during Zoom and during the last 2 years. Yeah. The body language, reaction, all that plays a tremendous amount of role in terms of trying to advance a certain message. It's not a matter of, you press the button, see you later, I got to go now, whatever. It becomes a little more difficult when you're face to face. You have to be a little more focused. You have to pay a little bit more attention. Okay, and I think you get more things done on certain areas as it relates, certainly in diplomacy and foreign policy.
Yeah, well said. I think I agree, and I think most everybody in this room that's here in person probably agrees as well. I want to back up a little bit. In an earlier answer, you mentioned your relationship with Cyprus and meetings there. How important do you feel U.S.-Cyprus relationships are? And, what's your predictions and how do you feel about us moving forward?
Well, Cyprus is another one of those countries that the United States has very important interest in. And certainly we at the American Hellenic Institute owe our existence to Cyprus because the founder, Gene Rosidis, back in '74, as a matter of fact, founded this organization specifically because of the illegal invasion of Turkey in 1974 on Cyprus. And he felt that the Greek American community needed to have a full-time professional organization to deal with these issues on a day-to-day basis, because it's always better to prevent a crisis than to have to react to a crisis. And ultimately, that was the goal. And now, of course, we're on the eve of our 50th anniversary in 1924, and our organization is going a much more multifaceted direction on multiple things. But Cyprus is still a very core, important component of our mission. Cyprus, unfortunately, for those who are not aware, almost 48 years later, is still illegally occupied, is still divided, okay, by a country called Turkey with 43,000 occupation force. and this is a country that's in NATO. And this is important when we're talking about Ukraine today, because if you were to substitute the word Ukraine and Putin with the words Turkey and Erdogan, okay, the messaging is the same. The same violation of international law, the same violation of the UN Charter, the same violation of the rule of law, and so forth and so on. We shouldn't be having double standards. We shouldn't be appeasing others, okay, and having two sets of standards of diplomacy. What Russia is doing is despicably wrong. But then when we have a NATO member, okay, who's been a beneficiary of U.S. foreign aid into the billions of dollars, okay, for the better part of 5 decades, okay, continuing to occupy and dividing a country of the European Union today with 43,000 troops, how can then our U.S. ambassador to the UN in a Security Council meeting, Ambassador Greenfield, put a rhetorical question to the Russian ambassador and say, how would you like to have 100,000 troops on your border? Well, in Cyprus, there are 43,000 troops in Cyprus, not on the border, but in Cyprus. Okay, so this presents a problem. But the relationship has been elevated by the United States and Cyprus over the course, especially, and under the the Secretary Pompeo and the previous administration, it became more one of strategic importance. They signed a statement of intent where they increased their bilateral security cooperation. Sometime in 2022, this was also signed under Secretary Pompeo on one of his visits there. They're going to implement what's called a Cyclops, Cyprus Center for Land, Open Seas, and Port Security is what the acronym stands for. And this is going to be a center whereby they're going to train for purposes of maritime security, cyber security, and border security. In the last 3 or 4 years, for the first time ever, Cyprus has been a beneficiary of IMET to the tune of $500,000. For the first time ever, a defense attaché at the Embassy of Cyprus has been invited to come here. There's been more joint exercises between the United States and Cyprus, and more Navy ports of call to ports in Cyprus. So the relationship continues to grow, and it's become strategically important. Cyprus has been locally identified as a stationary aircraft carrier. Again, another friendly nation. It's not part of NATO. It's not part of an alliance in that regard, but it is an important country for, again, projecting U.S. geostrategic interest. It's Western-oriented. It's democratic. It's value-oriented. And it's a country just a few, not less than 100 miles from Israel, Lebanon, and some other areas where it's also served in the past for purposes of evacuating Americans in times of crisis, like it was from Lebanon about 10 years ago. So the relationship is strong, but nonetheless, it's still a country that is occupied and divided by a NATO member. And we cannot lose sight of that. And we make the argument at the Institute, if in fact it was whole, free, and at peace, which another one of those terms is it refers to Cyprus, it would be able to play a much more important role than constantly have to try to defend itself by provocative actions of Turkey and also of the occupation force. And there's much more to this, violations of Cyprus's exclusive economic zone, daily incursions into Greek sovereignty by Turkish F-16s. It goes on and on. Turkey continues to play a very unstable role in the Eastern Mediterranean. And we at the Institute continuously try to advocate and to promote and bring awareness of that to U.S. policymakers, because that affects U.S. interest when a NATO member is acting negatively on a very important area of which I defined, earlier in this conversation.
Fantastic. And I kind of want to wrap up this interview, and you alluded to this a little bit with, obstacles we have in Cyprus. But in a bigger picture, I want to ask, what do you see as the biggest obstacle in the Eastern Mediterranean within diplomacy and innovation, and how do we get past it?
Well, one thing is to be able to understand, under the concept of realpolitik. I'm not always a big, supporter of realpolitik, but you can't deal things, in a vacuum either. You got to understand what the realities are. And I believe sometime, and I've been doing this, like I said, a long time here in Washington, through many administrations, many people at the State Department, a lot of bureaucracy, and some things just need to change and to understand what those current realities are in the Eastern Mediterranean today. And we cannot continuously promote these anachronistic ideologies as it relate to a country like Turkey, which by many I still believe is viewed in some kind of Cold War Soviet containment policy, which is how I believe in my opinion it is viewed. And therefore it kind of gets this carte blanche to do anything it wants, okay, with immunity. And that has to stop. And we need to understand right now that you have three countries: Greece, member of NATO, member of the European Union, one of the most important and the most powerful. We didn't even talk about Greece's military capabilities. They are second to none regarding NATO, and by far a mini superpower in the concept of the Balkans. Okay, Greece, a major maritime power. Greece transports 20% of all the world's commerce. Somebody said today, if all the truck drivers were to stop for 2 days, what would happen, to the U.S. commerce? Well, if Greek ships were to stop in the 7 seas, for about 3 or 4 days, the world commerce could have a tendency to collapse. And then you have this relationship that's developed with Cyprus and Israel. Israel, obviously our most important ally in the region, and Cyprus, which with its capabilities and its capacities regarding being able to play the role that it can play, and the continuing advancement of this trilateral relationship, and the +1, which was elevated by Secretary Pompeo to his level, and we hope at some point that Secretary Blinken will elevate it to his level. The U.S. supports it, but Secretary Blinken has yet to come aboard in any one of these meetings where he physically himself has appeared with the other three countries, and that is important to send the message. This is the reality of the Eastern Mediterranean. These are the countries that are promoting that peace and stability and projecting our interest, and those who are not need to be called out, especially ones that are in NATO and who have aspirations for one day joining the European Union. And I'll leave it with this, because one of the things when you're an organization of 50 years old, hell, we've been around more than some countries have been around, but I went to my files in the basement, and we were the ones who first reached out to Joe Biden back in '74 with our people in Delaware when the organization started and Cyprus was invaded, and we educated then Senator Joe Biden on the issues regarding Cyprus and the Eastern Mediterranean. And then, of course, we kept relationships with him the whole time when he was in the Congress and when he was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I found a number of letters downstairs, but there was one in particular. It was 1989 to our then chairman, Dr. Dean Lomas, who since passed away about a year ago from Delaware, who was the first person to make contact with Joe Biden on behalf of the Greek American community. We had invited Joe Biden to some event to be a speaker. He wrote back he couldn't do it for XYZ reasons. Okay, but said this is an important time for Cyprus. I'm paraphrasing a little bit now. It's an important time for Cyprus, and we need to make sure that the next administration, that was the George Bush administration, the son, okay, it puts Cyprus at the top of the priority list. Well, he's not the administration. Has he put Cyprus at the top of the of his administration's list? I haven't seen it yet. But then he went on to say also that until every soldier, Turkish soldier, leaves Cyprus, Turkey should not be included in the community, international community of countries. Those were strong comments. Those were by Joe Biden in 1989. Has anything changed since then? Certainly nothing has changed on the ground. Turkey continues to have 40,000 troops. Cyprus continues to be divided, okay? And President Erdogan of Cyprus has now made even stronger bellicose messages regarding we need to have now a two-state solution, and is encroaching on different areas of trying to create this fictitious and illegal two-state concept, or potentially an annexation along the lines of what Russia did of Crimea about 5-6 years ago. So these are the things that are going on in the East Mediterranean, and we need to understand the realities are different. Our important issues are more important than ever before for the United States, and we need allies that are faithful and true to our values and our interests. Look, countries are always going to do things based on interest. We get that, okay? But I submit to you The countries in the Eastern Mediterranean that involve Greece, Cyprus, and Israel they also have the same values of the United States of America, and that becomes even more important. It's not just the interests that correspond, but it's the values. And those things just have to come more to the forefront of this administration and any administration moving forward as it relates to the Eastern Mediterranean.
Well said. Nick Larigakis, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
And great hearing your insights into the Eastern Mediterranean.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.